So the title of my paper is The Creation, Perpetuation, and Exploitation of Appalachian Stereotypes in Modern Media. Since the late 1800s, Appalachia has been portrayed as a region full of lazy, violent, ignorant people that needed saved in both the literal and spiritual meaning from their way of life. Appalachians are portrayed as inferior others in ways that make the region undeserving of respect and support that the rest of the country receives. The creation of these stereotypes began as a way to portray the region for the gain of others, such as local color writers, business investors, missionaries, and others who wanted those outside the region to understand what was happening in the Appalachian Mountains according to the other outsiders. Since their creation, the stereotypes of the Appalachian region have not evolved or changed in any way. These stereotypes have become the cookie-cutter way that modern media and other outsiders choose to describe all people from the area, regardless of the outcry from the region. Modern media and others who create content about the Appalachian region, such as reality TV series like MTV's Buck Wild, and writing like J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy, have grasped onto the created stereotypes, furthering the perpetuation and exploitation of said stereotypes. Before one can begin to understanding how these stereotypes affect the region, it is essential to understand why people stereotype and how these stereotypes came to be such a large part of the image of Appalachia. According to Angela Cook Jackson and Elizabeth K. Hansen in their article Appalachian Culture and Reality TV, The Ethical Dilemma of Stereotyping Others, stereotyping is automatic. This automaticity involves the spontaneous activation of some well-learned set of associations or responses a person has developed through repeated activation in memory. Examples is systematic grouping or social characterizations. These automatic assumptions are the brain's way of processing the tons of information it takes in very quickly. Although Cook, Johnson, and Hansen offer a more scientific reason behind stereotyping, Bill M. Fraley argues that stereotyping gives those that are hoping to exploit the region a leg up in convincing those outside the region that this group is inferior. She states, these cultural stereotypes of Appalachians are noticeably similar to stereotypes of other people whose land, natural resources, and labor have been stolen by a majority group. Stereotypes are powerful vehicles for assumptions about personal worth and understandings of power relationships between a majority and minority population. Fraley's argument echoes a point made by Richard Drake in A History of Appalachia. He states some business promotional writings tended to see the coal, timber, tourist, and business potential of the area. In such accounts, the people were largely invisible, except as they might contribute to the ease with which the region's resources might be exploited. From the very beginning of Appalachia's creations, according to Drake, the Appalachian region has been painted as a place rich in resources and poor in quality people. These stereotypes have been used continuously throughout modern media to continue to paint a picture of the low-life Appalachian. Katie Alagio explores the use and reuse of these stereotypes in her article, Locals on Local Color, Imagining Identity in Appalachia. She argues that the images of Appalachia materialize from a few reports on the region, none coming from the people themselves. Regardless of the lack of information, Appalachia became known across the nation as a place apart, a different and sometimes dangerous place, a place whose people possessed only the mere rudiments of civilization. This image is one that the mass media uses when dealing with the area. She notes that the media consumers see this portrayal of mountain people in movies, television, comic strips, and postcards. It is this static portrayal that Michael Edward Hess, Sharon Lynn Caspuela, Patrick Burst, Kristen Siskovisk, Jenny Lang, Catherine Macy, and Elizabeth Slusher address in their article, Localized Othering, Understanding Regionally and Geographically Bound Stereotypes in Appalachia. Very early on, these authors addressed the creation of these stereotypes, stating, Lewis explains, born in the fertile minds of the late 19th century of local color writers, Appalachia was invented in the caricatures and atmospheric landscapes of the escapist fiction they pinned to entertain the emergent middle class. Hess et al. Supports the argument made by Allegio and Drake by pointing out that the writings about Appalachia were created to entertain people outside of the topic, both regionally and economically. Hess et al. Further supports Allegio and Drake's argument by stating that regardless of the constant change in language and the evolution of people within the region, the stereotypes created about the region have become persistent, utterly fixed, and fastened solidly. These seemingly permanent descriptors have become a staple in mass media, and according to Cook, Johnson, and Hansen, have had a lasting effect on the people of the region. The constant misrepresentation of the entire Appalachian region is problematic because the assumptions are leading media consumers to believe that the inaccurate descriptions reflect reality, and these actions can result in social injustices for individuals who make up that subculture. Stereotypical assumptions also affect the way that those within the stereotyped community feel about themselves, thus affecting the amount of value they place on their lives and their abilities. Fraley argues stereotypes are powerful vehicles for assumptions about personal worth and understandings of power relationships between a majority and minority population. A constant barrage of misrepresentation and a lack of proper representation of one's community can cause one to subconsciously conform to the box in which they are continuously placed. If Appalachians continually hear that they are lazy, ignorant, shiftless, and cannot better themselves, a significant portion will eventually begin to believe these assumptions and begin living a version of the life they are assumed to be living. Both Allegio and Cook, Johnson, and Hansen offer a look into the ways that media producers should and could begin to combat the rampant misrepresentation of the Appalachian region. In her article, Allegio explores how more recent scholarship has begun to investigate the origins of the Appalachian stereotype and challenge the misinformation and misrepresentation that has held on since the original creation of these stereotypes. Her work offers a fix for the academic misrepresentation and misinformation, but does little to nothing for the world of media. This is where Cook, Johnson, and Hansen offer some hope for a better media future. They argue that it is often impossible to ask media producers to altogether remove the use of stereotypes because of the way that assumed information helps process the material housed within tiny pieces of media. However, media producers must be aware of how much of the implied knowledge applies to the group that they are portraying and must be active in using up-to-date and correct information to double-check that their choices are ethical. Ethical choices and the use of up-to-date information when creating media is something that both Vance and MTV fall short on. Both modern media creators have perpetuated and exploited these created stereotypes for their own personal gain. J.D. Vance's novel, Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a family and culture in crisis, is described as one of this campaign season's saddest and most fascinating books, a moving memoir, and one of the standout success of 2016. These are only a few of what seem to be a never-ending list of reviews praising Vance for writing a novel that describes how he transcended severe disadvantages of an Appalachian upbringing, strife with familial drug abuse, neglect at the hands of his mother, poverty, and all-around hopelessness, to become a successful businessman in Silicon Valley. The only issue with this picture being painted by Vance and praised and expanded by these reviewers is that it is just that, a fictitious image created by somebody who desperately wants to fit into a community in which he is not a part. Vance is essentially a modern local color writer who is writing about the Appalachian region from outside, using only peripheral knowledge to create a narrative where he fits into the Appalachian community. He places himself outside of the community on the first page of the book, stating, "I grew up poor in the Rust Belt, in an Ohio steel town." A few pages later, he follows this up by telling the reader that he identifies with, not belongs within, the millions of working class white Americans of Scotch-Irish descent who have no college degree, hillbillies, rednecks, or white trash, again, placing himself on the outskirts of this group. His language continuously tells readers that he is not a member of this group, and yet he is able to talk about their family traditions and lack of education in broad, sweeping terms that combines all those living in Appalachia into a single entity. Vance, like other writers, is using the little bit of knowledge he has of the Appalachian people and the misinformed and out-of-date stereotypes that the mass media has been pumping through their programs to look from the outside in and profit off of the threadbare connections he has to the hills of Appalachia. Although the book still holds much of its popularity, the longer the book holds on to that popularity, the more that people begin to realize that something is not quite right about his odyssey and personal identification as a hillbilly. Even though Appalachians, authors, reviewers, and scholars have begun to push back against Vance's collection of Appalachian stereotypes bound in hardback, he is still holding on to and benefiting from the fame that came with the publication of his novel. As of December 4th, 2019, Hillbilly Elegy is ranked number 19 on Amazon's top 20 most sold and most read nonfiction book of the week list. It is still number 4 in the rural sociology category, number 9 in the social classes and economic disparity category, and number 7 in the ethics studies category. Along with the popularity that the book is continuing to have, Vance's reach is expanding into the movie and streaming world. The novel is now getting a film adaptation whose ranks have filled with large names such as Glenn Close, Amy Adams, Bo Hopkins, and more in the acting department. In the writing and producing department, it is being written by Oscar nominee Vanessa Taylor and is being produced by Julie O. Along with all these big names being tagged onto the movie, it is also going to gain even more fame. After winning a bidding war with a $45 million bid, Netflix now has sole movie rights to the Ron Howard adaptation of the novel. This was written last year and was supposed to be read at last year's conference. So this, of course, is most everything that you guys already know. So I apologize for giving information that most people probably already know at this point. Even though streaming services are taking over the world, reality TV is still a thriving industry that uses the same exploitive practices to make money off the use of stereotypes. MTV has a long history of creating reality TV that gives viewers a look into the real lives of people in which they choose to focus on their cameras. Their show includes Jersey Shore, Teen Mom, and all the subsequent spin-off, Gypsy Sisters, and many more. Though as of the way to replace Jersey Shore, a new time prime reality TV show, Buck Wild is described as an authentic comedy set in the rural foothills of West Virginia. The show follows a group of young Appalachians who like to dodge grown-up responsibilities and do whatever they can, such as throwing dump truck pool parties or building their own human slingshots to entertain themselves in an area where money is tight, but the bond between friends and family is a core piece of the lives of this group. John Stevens, the executive producer of the show, stated that Buck Wild was about showing viewers the ideas of a good time hanging out in the woods. He followed this up by stating that he felt that there was a certain coolness of the show and that it was about laughing with this group as they made their way through their lives. This show, like Vance's book, did nothing more than create a new way to gawk at Appalachians in a created reality that allows media creators to mold them to fit the stereotypical archetype that those outside the region believe is a true representation of the Appalachian people. Even though Buck Wild has been canceled because of the death of one of its main characters, the show still earned MTV a large amount of money and helped pull it out of its decline in 2013. When the show premiered in January of that year, 2.5 million viewers tuned in to watch. Over the first season, over 3.2 million people watched the episode premieres and reruns every week, and MTV was paid $10 million for the advertising slots during the commercial breaks. The 9 members of the cast were paid only $1,000 per episode for the first season, meaning that the company paid out less than $130,000 for the money that it gained for the show to the main cast that are now being referred to as Hilarious Hicks and have had to deal with the constant repercussions of their actions on the TV series in making their way to the professional world. This also does not make it into the consideration of what the Gandy family lost with the death of their son. MTV continues this exploitation and playing into the popularity of the media that perpetuates these stereotypes. As of May 2018, MTV was back in West Virginia producing and filming another show like Buck Wild, but with more humor and a stronger female cast, meaning that the exploitation is far from over. When looking into these stereotypes, it is easy to get lost in all of the examples that perpetuation and exploit, leaving one to wonder if there is anyone who is creating media representations of the area that does not fall into the same category as Vance and MTV. The number of examples of good media representation of the region seem to be far and few between because of the lack of recognition for those that challenge the media company's representation. A couple of those examples are the analogy Appalachian Reckoning, A Region Response to Hillbilly Elegy by Anthony Harkins and Meredith McCarroll, and the documentary Hillbilly by Sally Rubin and Ashley York. Appalachian Reckoning is a collection of scholarship, prose, poetry, and photography, and is described as a retort at turns rigorous, critical, angry, and hopeful to the long shadow Hillbilly Elegy has cast over the region and its imagining. As a direct challenge to the perpetuation of Hillbilly Elegy, Appalachian Reckoning challenges the picture that is often painted as a representation of Appalachia and gives a more realistic representation of the complex area that is Appalachia. This collection has not yet ascended to the level of popularity Hillbilly Elegy. It has been on Amazon's top 20 most sold and most read nonfiction books of the week list, but it is currently number 68 in the Human Geography section, number 32 in the Sociology of Rural Area section, and number 84 in the Sociology of Class section. The documentary Hillbilly is on the same level as Appalachian Reckoning. It has not gained as much fame as Buck Wild and other representations of the kind, but it is slowly growing in its reach. It is now available on Hulu. And that is all that I have. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Joy, are you ready?
I think I'm ready, and I apologize to everyone in the session, and especially to Pauletta having to go on for me. I have kiosks all around me. There are people loading a moving van as I speak, and it's not ideal. I'm probably a textbook kind of example this morning of how not to give a video presentation, but I'm going to try, all right? And I am trying to share my screen, and I know that you have my PowerPoint if I'm not able to. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly. Give me 1 second. I think I need to give you screen sharing privileges.
I was going to say it's not showing it yet. It's not allowing me to. And, since I've had so many technology glitches, I'm not going to do it full screen. So I apologize. You will see the PowerPoint sort of not in the ideal mode, but.
I think you should be ready now.
Okay. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right. Let's get going then. And again, my apologies, and my apologies to the people of Berea, because that is what I am presenting on today. I want to talk about a public art initiative that took place between November 2018 and November 2019 in Berea, Kentucky. It was sponsored by a grassroots group, Murals of Berea, comprised of diverse community members, high school and college students, retirees, professional artists, factory workers, parents, grandparents, cisgender folks, LGBTQ, people from across the political, socioeconomic, and religious spectrum. Some were native to Berea, some were longtime residents, some were new to the community. Berea has had a long history of tolerance and inclusion. Berea College was founded on the principle of integrated education and was the first interracial and coeducational college in the South. But in reality, the community has struggled with tensions between town and gown, peoples of different races and ethnicities, locals and transplants, liberals and conservatives, Christians and those of other faiths or of no religious persuasion. You don't have to look very far or deep to see the cracks. In 2016, the town's popular Spoonbread Festival was canceled after no agreement could be reached on sales of items related to the Confederate flag. Last summer, people showed up to try and intimidate Black Lives Matter protesters, and a related sign at a nearby church was vandalized. Then the protest was countered with a Blue Lives Matter rally. And recently, a motorcycle club proudly displayed the Confederate flag in their clubhouse window. And I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of that, but that generated a really polarized debate on social media, as you might imagine. The divides are evident in more subtle ways as well. Do you eat at Noodle Nirvana or at Cracker Barrel? And since we were talking about J.D. Vance, he has a mention of the Cracker Barrel kind of set of folks in his book. Do you belong to the Let's Grow Berea or the Berea Moderates Facebook pages? And anyone familiar with Berea will know what I mean by that. Berea is actually not all that different from other communities in the nation today. And I mention this not to denigrate its citizens, but rather as prelude to discussion of a remarkable project that was able to bridge some of these chasms through creativity. Murals of Berea started with Ollie Drezick here on the right, a retired newcomer who attended a meeting in town where discussion centered around improving the look of Chestnut Street. For those who are not familiar with Berea, it is the main thoroughfare from I-75 to the College Square. Murals surfaced in this discussion more than once. So Drezick began talking with business owners to determine if there was interest in sponsoring or even allowing murals to be painted on their buildings. She also talked to Jeffrey Carpenter here on the right, then director of the 123 Accelerator Gallery in O Town. And that gallery is funded by the city's Tourism Commission. They both wanted to engage broad sectors across the populace to move the community forward. The first business owner to respond to the outreach was Sammy Rashid of the Knights Inn Motel, just off of I-75. Now, this motel is located in an area that has been a frequent source of complaints from nearby residents. Some owners have allowed their properties to deteriorate. Trash is a persistent problem, and it's not uncommon to find used syringes on the streets. Rashid commissioned Jesse Glenn, who was at that time a fellow with the gallery, to paint a set of wings that would invite selfies. And there is Glenn with his own selfie. This was quickly followed by commissioned murals in the motel lobby with this beautiful peacock and in the rooms. And then Glenn was commissioned to paint a mural in Old Town. Drezick and Carpenter then began to put out a call for Bereans who were interested in joining a mural group. No art experience required. When some local artist asked Drezick if selection process would be juried, she told them, "I don't even know what that means, but everyone is welcome." They first met at the public library and then later in the gallery. And they originally planned to paint the doors of local businesses, but decided instead to do freestanding doors akin to projects in Lexington and Winchester, Kentucky. Drezick facilitated these meetings and set clear boundaries for the planning sessions. No politics, no religion. Now, this may seem to avoid honest and hard discussions this country desperately needs to have today. But this group felt it allowed them to break through barriers. It opened a space for people from different walks of life with different values and beliefs to come together and work on a common goal. Drezick was also careful to not generate competition between artists or art groups in Berea. She operated on the principle that there's always enough for everyone. They solicited sponsors for the project, and anyone could, a private citizen or a business. And doors were soon donated. A member of the group who worked for Goodwill arranged for a truckload of free paint to be delivered. Artists contributed brushes, and anyone could come and work at the gallery on their door. They also, in addition to the artist, the main artist producing the doors, working on doors at the gallery, they set up a community door, and anyone could join in painting on that. And they also had a children's door that was open to anyone. LexArts from Lexington lent them stands to use as models, and volunteers stepped up to build and paint these stands. Since one of the challenges in Berea was to, and still is, to connect Chestnut Street with Old Town and the college, they envisioned an art walk of doors between these three areas. But when the city balked at their plan, Union Church, just off the college square, stepped in to offer their lawn as the initial display site. And that's what you are looking at here. The doors were then subsequently displayed at the annual Arts and Crafts Festival at Indian Fort Theater. And there's some people visiting that, and also at the Levitt Amp, because Berea is fortunate to be one of the sites for the Levitt Amp music festivals. And volunteers, brought their trucks and their muscle to move the doors each time they were displayed in a different venue. Other volunteers started a marketing campaign. An auction of the doors was planned for November. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter accounts helped spread the word, and Drezek did a lot of live streaming. Businesses and artists donated door prizes to encourage attendance, and the fact that there were many students involved drew diverse family members for the big night. And you see Jeffrey there, who was acting as MC for the auction. The money raised went both to the artist and to a fund to support future murals. Their fervor was infectious. Murals began to appear throughout town, one honoring the first Black registered nurse in Kentucky, another as a tribute to Berea scholar, writer, activist Bell Hooks. Some were just devoted to Berea itself. And this one to a community project, the Glades Educational Garden for Children. But I find that something even more precious happened. Hearts and minds were opened, lives changed, and I will share as many of their stories as I have time for today. Alicia Brown grew up in Texas, but moved to Kentucky as a teenager. She studied agriculture at Berea College, but has worked at unrelated jobs since, at an Amazon warehouse for several years, and now for a pharmaceutical company. She struggled with confidence, and in fact, she almost didn't do the interview with me. She was always creative and attended craft fairs as a youth as a way to help raise money for animal rescues, and that's just a detail of her door that you're seeing there. As a student, she felt excluded from the rest of the town and never got involved with the community. The Doors Project allowed her to meet different people, get to know their struggles, this is what she told me, and how the group might help them. On a personal level, it just made her feel better. When she was feeling down, she would work on her door, and it helped lift her spirits. David Dinsmore has had a lot of special challenges in his young life. He came to the project a little late and only had a couple of weeks to complete his door. Since he has always enjoyed nature, he opted for a simple flower motif because, as he explains, everyone loves flowers. Like Alicia, he gained confidence and hopes now to sell his cards and painted shoes in Old Town and online. The project allowed him to be known for his wonderful creativity and talent rather than his different abilities. Rodney Kimbungu came to Berea from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. After growing up in a city of 12 million, he looked forward to being in the countryside because he says it gives him peace of mind to reflect. His door, As Above, So Below, is about how opposites can complement one another to form a whole. He created the apple and the orange so that they swap each other's bodies. There's more to life than what we see on the surface, he says. He wants his art to make people feel uncomfortable, to challenge the status quo. And he used the Door Project as a channel through which a higher energy can communicate with the community. At this point in time, he says, when we are so disturbed and angry, the group is a way to allow us to connect with our deeper selves. Our purpose is to create and not to destroy. Patricia Watkins is a retired social worker, and she thought that as she puts it, mature person, she might have something to offer this diverse group. She's a founding member of Feminist Artists of Kentucky and hopes to promote murals related to women. Her door tells the story of Henrietta Child, who came to Berea in 1916 and traveled to small rural schools over the next 40 years, teaching children about different cultures. Watkins researched her life and her work and even examined the toys and other items that Child used in the classrooms. During the segregation era, Watkins points out, Child made a point of visiting Black schools, and Watkins even met a woman who remembered those visits. Watkins feels that the Door Project has already brought together artists who likely would not have otherwise associated with one another. And she hopes it has dispelled the notion that art should only be in a gallery and only for certain people. She also appreciates that it's brought down the barriers between art and craft. Michael Fitzgerald is a good example of the project's ability to tear down those sorts of barriers. He has always tinkered and made things, but he's never considered himself an artist. His door was in pretty rough shape at the beginning and wasn't usable. I think you can see that hopefully in the picture. But he notes there's beauty in broken things. He researched a technique for using a microwave transformer's voltage to burn patterns in his door. Most of his life, he's worked temp jobs, warehouse work, manufacturing, etc. I've seen too many people that go to work, go home, wake up the next morning, and go back to work, he says. Everyday life is a drudgery. Art brightens it up. For him, the relationships forged in the group were the project's greatest success. We encompass a little bit of everybody, he notes. We have our conservatives and our liberals, but people who have different values can sit in a room together and get this Door Project done together. Everybody is an artist. Everybody can do something. For Brian Wiley, who grew up in a military family with a Filipino mother and an American father, the project has offered an opportunity for enhanced connections to community and also for new commissions. Self-taught, he has been working in art professionally for about 10 years and has completed a number of murals in Madison County. He says, if you can't think creatively and critically, you stagnate. Jeff Schneider is also part of a military tradition. Both he and his wife served. Though he studied art before he enlisted, the only creative work he has done since then are small projects with his 8 children. His children, in fact, collaborated with him on his Tree of Life door. Each of them made drawings for the 8 planets it features. Schneider thought it was good for his kids to experience a community project such as this come together. Trisha Daly also has an art background in fashion design, but she's always felt a stigma attached to that career choice. There's a perception that you have nothing in your head, she laments. She decided to tell the story of Berea's women through the lens of fashion. She wanted people to know about Belle Miller, the first Black female student to graduate from Berea College, and she wanted them to notice the absence of Black women during the period of forced segregation. Clothing tells us a lot about history, she maintains, and she worked to include diverse body types, races, and religions. She acknowledged that the group had its ups and downs, as any will, but it gives her hope that they all came together during a period of harsh divisions for a greater good. Kina Sparks wasn't sure if she would have time to get involved in the project at first. She and her husband run a gaming shop in Old Town, have 2 children, and she works a factory job to help ends meet. But she found the time because she wants to see more magic in the world, she says, and envisions a community with lots of painted walls. Factory work is necessary, she acknowledges, but your soul needs more than robotic repetition. You need something special that makes you feel connected to the world. She went on to produce a second door. I think I jumped ahead to that second door for Berea College. This is actually the door that she did for the project, for the Doors project. And then she had a commission to do another community mural subsequently. And last but certainly not least, the 2 high school students that were involved in the project, it has meant coming to believe in themselves and the possibility of following your passions. Cox, who you see here, Lola Cox, and she is working here. She, after the Door project, was able to receive a grant from the Kentucky Foundation for Women, she and another artist. And that particular grant fosters mental health awareness for youth through art. And Haley Payne has just been on fire with commissions around town since she did the Door project. So I learned a lot through conducting the interviews with the participants in this project and attending their events, and I hope there is some food for thought for everyone today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Joy. Laura, if you want to go ahead and speak. And as for time, I think we should be okay. We go until 11:45, and then if for Q&A, if people want to stay beyond that, I'm totally fine to stay on as well.
Am I able to share my screen with everybody? Let's see.
I believe you have permission.
Okay.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. And then are you able to see me?
Yes.
There's no like little feedback on Teams, so I'm not sure. So we'll just, hope for the best. Is it still there?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Laura Smith, and I am actually a PhD candidate in the Department of Communication and Culture at Indiana University, and I study rhetoric and public memory, but I have had a really cool career change in the past year, and I am also an instructor at Queen's University of Charlotte at the Night School of Communication, or in the Night School of Communication, and because I study Appalachia and storytelling, it's actually really awesome. So what I'm going to do now is, just for, the sake of time, I'm going to only show a minute of this because it'll illustrate what I'm talking about.
Country music comes from right in here. This heart and soul that we all have.
You can dance to it. You can make love to it. You can play it at a funeral. It has something in it for everybody.
Country music is about human emotions. We're always looking for those topics that are going to tell us a lot about who we are, not just to the era that we cover, but who we are now.
If you want to look for like super strong women telling really amazing stories, you went to country.
I mean, the songs are just life. I've seen it or I've lived it. And I never would tell my husband which one was.
I believe that you can go look and find a country song that will help you feel better. Sometimes it might make you cry, but you'll feel better.
This is the story of a uniquely American art form that sometimes gets defined as 3/4 of the truth. And the people who made it, created it, and how it became a business.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash.
So there is an extended version of this documentary trailer that you can view online. There's also little synopses that you can also see. But as you guessed it from the title and from this trailer, I am going to be discussing truth-telling in Ken Burns's documentary or PBS limited series titled Country Music. And it did air in 2019. So this was a presentation that I intended to give in 2020 because it would have a little bit more relevancy. But hopefully it has given people the opportunity to see it. And if you haven't, I highly suggest that you should, even though it is quite a time commitment. So this is a miniseries produced by renowned filmmaker Ken Burns. It has 8 parts for a total of 16 hours. And they had for around 8 days, they had 2 hours air on PBS. They announced this project in January of 2014, even though interviews were actually conducted as early as 2012. And as you can guess, it was a multi-year project with 175 hours of interviews with over 100 artists and had to be condensed to 16 hours. Ken Burns did produce a companion novel, which I do suggest because it is pretty interesting, and it does cover some stuff that he didn't have the opportunity to discuss in the documentary. But this wasn't really promoted as much as you would anticipate it to be, but it was promoted more on XM radio and then some advertisements on about the week or so before, an interview with Roseanne Cash, etc. So this is a chronological documentary. It starts with the Carter family and Jimmy Rogers. It's followed by the active Hank Williams. And then he has a pretty big episode talking about how he became a superstar and then his unfortunate decline in health and passing away. But then it also moves through notable acts of the 20th century, such as Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson, and Dolly Parton. But the country music documentary concludes with the 1990s, specifically 1996. There are some artists they don't cover, like they don't really cover Alan Jackson, who's pretty big in pop country, but they do talk to Dwight Yoakam. Interestingly enough, this documentary is the last interview with artist Merle Haggard, who passed away in 2016. And so the episodes were divided into these, with the titles being The Rub, Hard Times, The Hillbilly Shakespeare, I Can't Stop Loving You, The Sons and Daughters of America, Will the Circle Be Unbroken, Are You Sure Hank Done It This Way, and Don't Get Above Your Raisin. And they covered things like in The Rub, the formation of folk music, Southern gospel, the creation of WSSM and the Grand Ole Opry, and also the Bristol Sessions. As someone who has studied the Carter family extensively, and that is what my dissertation is about, that is what I really focus on, and especially for this presentation, because as we will see, I talk about truth-telling, or whose truth are they telling? A little bit about Ken Burns. He is an American filmmaker known for his extensive interviewing and archival footage. He has been nominated for 2 Academy Awards, has won several Emmy Awards. Other notable works include The Civil War, Jazz, and the National Park's America's Best Idea. He does have a really good reputation for these phenomenal PBS documentaries, and the cinematography, because that's what he has been trained as for country music, is no exception. Overall, this documentary or this docuseries was perceived pretty positively. It gets a lot of things right, even though it's extremely overwhelming. He talks about total immersion in the genre, and he explains that country music has evolved from the origins to what we see country music in contemporary times. It's educational, it's emotionally stirring, it's always evolving. It talks about, the traditional immigrant songs, the traditional church songs, how we see in the Mountain Hollers, to how we really focus on Nashville being the epitome or the center of country music. And it tries its best to summarize a whole century of American music, but as we can imagine, there are some places where it falls short. And many critics have suggested that the history that Ken Burns is telling actually diminishes the hardships that many musicians and their family in Appalachia faced by presenting only a rosy picture to the audience. They don't really talk about the decline of people's mental health or the problems with addiction and other type of struggles that people have. They did highlight pretty extensively the demise of Hank Williams, and then Johnny Cash, obviously how he was really up and then down, and then he turned his whole self around. But a lot of scholars and music critics point to the snubs of many icons, including Glenn Campbell, Conway Twitty, Jerry Lee Lewis, and any type of bluegrass or newgrass, such as Alison Krauss or Sam Bush. So during the filming of this docuseries, Glenn Campbell, unfortunately, was suffering with Alzheimer's, but he was on a farewell tour. Conway Twitty had 44 #1 singles and many duets with Loretta Lynn, who was covered and interviewed in the docuseries, but maybe only a mention or two of Conway Twitty, but nothing about his contribution to the field. Jerry Lee Lewis, some people speculate that he wasn't interviewed for personal reasons, or they didn't want it to be about him, because he did have an extensive documentary with Johnny Cash's record label in the past, and then there was no explanation for why they didn't include bluegrass or newgrass, except for the fact simply they were out of time. So truth-telling, or the absence of, is what I focus on in my research or my analysis of the Ken Burns documentary. Certain artists were interviewed multiple times, even though they had a list of 101 that they did get something from. But what I found most notable was that there was the absence of many living family members who could contribute more to the story. And as a result, Burns is eliminating the opportunity for multiple truths to be told, which is contrary to his message of storytelling as the soul of community music, or of country music throughout. So throughout the documentary, Ken Burns talks about truth-telling and storytelling and how it's this integral part in country music. But when you don't have the whole picture, you're only telling one version of the story, and unfortunately, you're leaving something out. So to better contextualize this, I'm going to stick with what I'm really familiar with, which is the Carter family. And for some context, my dissertation is about this place called the Carter Family Fold in Hiltons, Virginia. If you haven't heard of it, I highly recommend that you look it up. It is the place that was created to pay respect to the original bluegrass, old-time music. Johnny Cash was the person who funded it financially. It was also the place that Johnny Cash gave his last performance, only word of mouth prior to his passing. So in the very first episode of Ken Burns' docuseries, he talks extensively about the Carter family. And he talks about Mother Maybelle, AP, Sarah, but he leaves out a few things. First of all, the Carter family, although were later known to be the first family of country music, they were never wealthy. They were never these rich people. They sometimes even struggled to get to where they had to be 30 miles away in Bristol to record music. But more interestingly, they leave out the story of Leslie Riddle. And Leslie Riddle was A.P. Carter's friend, or kind of like inside to a different world of Appalachia. And A.P. Carter and Leslie Riddle would go on these song finding trips. And because Leslie Riddle was a Black man, he was able to go to Black communities and record their music. However, this music was memorized melodically by Riddle, and AP would record the lyrics. AP would go back, use the lyrics, and in some cases make slight modifications, and then would record them. And very few people realize that some of the music that the Carter family did produce was kind of reinvented from other communities or other marginalized communities within Appalachia itself. Riddle also was rumored to have taught Maybelle the riffs of several hits that the Carter family went later to record. But in the docuseries, we spend a lot of time interviewing Rosanne Cash. And Rosanne Cash is a country musician on her own accord, and I guess she was very accessible for this. However, we're completely negating the other side of this Carter Cash legacy. So the Carter family was pretty involved in helping Johnny Cash recover from his hardships. And Johnny Cash in turn did a lot for the Carter family. He did a lot for Mother Maybelle, and they kind of worked as this dual act. But we never see the people who were legacies of the Carter family be interviewed, even though they're alive. So this image on the left is Rita Forrester. And Rita Forrester is the daughter of Jeanette Carter, whose parents were AP and Sarah, and she's the current owner, founder of the Carter family fold. And so by negating these perspectives, we're only seeing one side. And unfortunately, Rosanne Cash never really mentioned the Carter family, never really mentioned the relationship with June Carter, because a lot of times you don't really think of Johnny Cash's first wife. You think of Johnny Cash and June Carter, but that was never really discussed. And there was a lot of time spent on Johnny Cash and June Carter. But why is this significant? So this is significant when you take into consideration who is missing from the historical narrative that Burns presents. When Burns is only promoting the stories of one person or of a select group of people, when he's had the opportunity to discuss Appalachia and country music and the evolution of music with so many people, it's actually turning Appalachia into a commodity, or this is something that I argue. And when you're turning Appalachia into a commodity and you're perpetuating stereotypes and myths and folklore that have plagued the region for decades, it's only furthering misrepresentation for its region and its people. And when you have a platform like PBS and country music, you have the opportunity to get it right. But when you only tell the truth of certain people, you're only accentuating and helping reinvent the problems that the people of Appalachia are always trying to get away from. So thank you for listening to my presentation.
That was wonderful. Thank you. And if you do need a little bit extra time, there's definitely some wiggle room with that.
Oh, no, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. We can go ahead and start the Q&A then. So we can do this a couple different ways. If people want to send their questions in the chat, we can go through in the order that the presentations happen, just to keep things kind of organized. So let's start with any questions for Pauletta. And you can either throw them in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask.
I personally just wanted to say, Pauletta, that I really enjoy your writing style.
Oh, thank you. I know this, I know my presentation was a little bit different because it's a personal essay, but I really appreciate everyone listening, and I could feel you there with me. So thanks for giving me that support.
And so if we did want to read your work in full, is there somewhere that we could access that?
Yes, that is the comes from the full version of it is in Appalachian Journal out of Appalachian State University in North Carolina. It was the fall winter 2020 issue, so it's not the current issue, but the one that that was out right before that. And I'll put that in the chat. I'll put a link to the Appalachian Journal's website in the chat for folks. So thank you, guys. Looks like there is a question for me and for the other presenters. I'll go ahead and read it out loud. Do you feel that multi-million-dollar entertainment companies, including Vance's publisher, are intentionally perpetuating stereotypes of various groups of people, including Appalachian people, in order to protect, legitimize, and maintain the status quo that allowed these corporations to rise to power in the first place? So that is a great question. I guess, and I'll let others who are maybe not poets and who may have a little bit more background to answer. But I guess my sense is that yes, in the same way that perhaps we all, either consciously or hopefully unconsciously, act to hang on to what we have, even if it's not legitimately ours. And that's a much larger question, of course, of how we all need to be able to open up our eyes to realizing that what we're trying to preserve is not always ours to hold. But maybe others would like to respond.
Yeah, I was just going to go ahead and jump in there. So just to kind of piggyback off of what you said. So like I said in my paper, stereotyping is something that is kind of just automatic that we do. And so they have figured out that I think these companies have sort of figured out that it's easy for us to just kind of, make money off of it. And it's easy for them to kind of turn it into a joke and be like, oh, well, we're just joking, or, oh, it's all fun, and, oh, well, look at, they're doing, or, in situations where it's like the TV shows like Buck Wild or some of the other ones that they're producing, oh, they're doing this to themselves. They've signed on for this, but then they're also put in a situation where they're told, but think about all the money that you can make, and so it's just kind of more of the question of whether it is ethical for them to continue to do it. And so it's, it's all about those power relationships and just kind of keeping those power, in my opinion, keeping those power relationships where they are, just because we live in a capitalistic nation. And so, capitalism is built on those power relationships. So they, of course, want them to stay where they are.
Do we have any other questions for Pauletta?
Thank you all. I will, I'll take my video off, but I did put links to the essay and also to my website in the chat. Should you be interested, the website is focuses a little bit more on poetry, but there's also some links to essays there as well. Thanks.
Okay, we can go ahead and move on to questions for Ryan then.
Ryan, I guess this is more of a comment than a question, but I really liked your presentation. I just speaking about Buck Wild, my grandparents live in Sissonville where the series was filmed, so I've spent a lot of time there. And so I appreciate that's my little claim to fame in my app studies classes is that I've spent a lot of time where the critically acclaimed series was filmed. But I really liked your phrasing of J.D. Vance as a local color writer in my sort of like, I'm new to Appalachian studies. I'm in undergrad. So it's, I've learned about local color writers. I've kind of like sort of built that understanding. And of course, learned about everybody's opinions about J.D. Vance, but I had never thought about him in that way, that he was working in sort of like, we revile these local color writers and the role they play in history, but viewing him as a modern day one is something I never thought about, and I really like that perspective. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I hadn't, because I read the book in undergrad. I took an Appalachian history course, and my professor was just kind of like, he very much is one of those that he was just kind of like, let's see what you guys think of this. And I, of course, was very heated throughout the entire time that we were reading the book. But then in a graduate course, which is where I wrote this paper, I was just kind of, I learned more about local color writers and stuff. And I realized kind of what he was doing with it, and was able to just kind of compare, what he had done with, in my opinion, where he grew up in Ohio, that is not Appalachia. And even when you're looking at the map, unless I am remembering the map wrong, that is not considered Appalachia. So he's not Appalachian, and the very little time that he spent in Jackson County, in my opinion, does not make him Appalachian. And it's just, and he still, with his language, like I mentioned in my paper, he situates himself outside of the group. Like, he wants to be like, oh, well, I'm Appalachian, but the way that you're looking at his rhetoric and the way that he talks about himself, he does not even see himself as Appalachian truly. So it was just kind of, talking about it like he situates himself as the outside, and he's talking about a place that he really has no idea about. And it's like, he's like, I'm going to tell you guys about this place. And he's doing the exact same thing as these writers from the 1800s and the 1900s. And he's just like, I'm going to tell you exactly how it is in this place that I have absolutely no idea about. And so just being able to kind of make that connection there, to me, I just kind of had that epiphany in it. I kind of feel like it gave the paper a little bit more backbone. So it looks like I've got two things here, two questions in the chat. So the first one said, have you witnessed stereotypes in other forms of entertainment that might not count as media, for example, stereotypes in drama or stage performance? I can't think of anything right off the top of my head, but I'm sure they're probably out there. Anything that you can think of where they're going to pull like a regular like hillbilly, or a dumb backwoods person, that's just kind of anything where they've created that person, that is just kind of thought of as that Appalachian person. And the next one is Ryan, I wonder if you have any thoughts about the show, The Outsiders, and how that fits into the misrepresentation of Appalachian narrative and the culture. I realize it ran out of 2 seasons in 2016. It may be outdated in terms of relative to your work. I have actually not seen the show, so I'm not sure. It definitely seems like something that I would probably watch and would like to see, just to kind of see how they represent Appalachians. But yeah, so it'd definitely be something that I would like to check into. So thank you for the recommendation. So I like to compare. Thank you. Working. Yeah, and I also with Joy said, in working with the Cincinnati ASA conference with colleagues such as Pauletta, I became aware of how much many current residents of Ohio who have roots in Appalachia do feel they are Appalachian. They feel very hurt by the exclusion. And so I agree with there is a difference between being culturally Appalachian and geographically Appalachian. And so I am both culturally and geographically Appalachian. So I was born and raised in Harlan County, Kentucky, and I was raised very Appalachian. But I have a friend who grew up in Florida. That's where she was born, but she was raised by family who was like born and raised in the area. But she is very culturally Appalachian, and so she's now living in Kentucky, but she lives very much along the like Appalachian baseline, and like is like a very Appalachian human being. And so that's just kind of the way that I see it. So like if you it just kind of, I guess, depends on how you situate yourself. And so again, it'll come back to the thing, like he situates himself with his rhetoric outside of the Appalachian community. You just kind of have to look at the way that he words things. And the question of Vance's Appalachianist is a thorny one. There's a whole field, yes, of study around Appalachian migration and urban Appalachian migrants. If you leave Appalachia, you will still be Appalachian. What about your children? Yeah, and I, again, like with Pauletta, like I said, it's about the, culturally and geographically, and it's, yeah, it is a slippery slope depending on how you argue things. And I, again, just like to go back to the way that he just kind of with his rhetoric sort of situations himself outside of the group by saying that he identifies with, but doesn't really seem to, doesn't really like, the way I can't remember exactly how I word it, but he just kind of talks about how he identifies with them, but doesn't really mark himself as a member of the group that way.
Do we have any other questions for Ryan? There is one more in the chat. I'm not sure if this is one specifically for you or just if any of the speakers want to take a whack at it.
Okay. Yeah, so Michael said, one of the most prevalent stereotypes of Appalachia includes incest and inbreeding. Where exactly does this stereotype come from? So I think that just kind of comes from the fact that, again, from the like local color writers, and the fact that most of the time hillbillies and Appalachian people were thought of just to be so compacted and just kind of excluded from other people from like around them and everything, that there was thought to be no way that they could be procreating with people outside of their own family. There was like, there's no way that they're going to travel X amount of miles outside of their hauler to, go into town to like meet people, and it was just people being so completely unaware of how the Appalachian culture actually functioned. Because people often met their wives at, the county fairs and things like that. And the get-togethers that happened once or twice a year, so and that's what happened. Like people would meet their wives there. And so when they got together once a year in town, but people would just assume that's like, oh, well, they live, so many, like 20, 30 miles up the road. And so people are just marrying their cousins and, things like that. And again, most stereotypes are bound in some pieces of truth, and that is there's always that terrible piece of it, when you think about it. But it is exaggerated when you sit and say it's like, oh, this is my brother, cousin, or this is my daddy, uncle, or whatever, which is some of the crazy things that you get in Appalachian culture. But it's just that exclusion, that there's no way that they would be coming out of these crazy haulers and these families being this far apart. There's no way that they would be marrying and procreating outside of their small families.
All right. Okay. Any others, or are we ready to move on to Laura? All right, why don't we then move on? And any questions for Laura now?
No question, but I'll just say great presentation. I had also seen the not all of the episodes, but the ones that I was able to catch on television, and it's always frustrating, I think, when you know the story to be larger and more complex and really ultimately more interesting. On the other hand, I was also glad that it was there, because it's a story that is not often told. So I appreciated how you handled that paradox in your presentation.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to say great job to all the presenters in here. I think we had a good audience crowd, and I think everyone did such a great job, and it was really nice to listen to everyone's presentations.
Oh my goodness, yes, Joy. I am so sorry. Questions for Joy, please. Or, oh wait. Laura, do you want to answer that question first? That just got sent in.
Oh, sure. I'm not familiar with it, but I definitely have to check that out. I'll write that down right now. Thank you for the suggestion, Michelle.
Okay. Now for Joy.
Joy, again, not a question, but just a comment that it was wonderful to see see all that good work by Berea folks, and I look forward to one of these days when my vaccination fully clicks in, being able to go down to Berea and see some of this for myself.
I'm trying to unmute myself. You know, at the auction, the individual drawers were purchased by, you know, diverse people. So, you know, a lot of them now are in homes or, and they're not displayed publicly anymore. I mean, some are, but some aren't. It would be nice to have a way where they could all be, you know, reunited again. So.
Yeah, I know that that the pandemic has prevented so many folks from spotlighting new work that has come out, and so it would be great if there could be some sort of, no longer an opening, but a celebration, I suppose, of the work that happened.
Yes, and maybe I can suggest that. I felt really bad. They had such momentum going, and then COVID hit, and so, you know, they couldn't keep meeting. Individuals continued working, and, you know, these murals have continued going up in Berea, but that group dynamic was interrupted. So I'm hoping that they can get back together once it's safe to do so. And if there aren't other questions, I just want to thank everybody for listening, and again apologize for my craziness. And I will now go and get in a moving van and drive to Berea, which is where I'm relocating.